So, whenever you like, Mr. President, we can start. Señores y señoras, buenos días. Yo me llamo Víctor Vaguado, yo soy representante de España.
Probably facilitate this symposium. Buenos días, señores y señores.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this first symposium of the International Civil Aviation Organization on assistance to aircraft accidents and their victims and their families. This event has been possible thanks to the support of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and the Urban Agenda of Spain, and the invaluable collaboration of the regional government and the Aéreos Foundation. Many thanks to them. I'd like to publicly express our gratitude to the different authorities here, from the Spanish national government, the regional government, the Gran Canaria Island Council and the City Council of Las Palmas. We're also very grateful to the President of the Council of the ICAO and to those who have made the effort to be here, having come all the way from Montreal. I'd also like to thank everybody who has come here to the island, and to all the top-level speakers who are going to be sharing their knowledge with us. Thank you all for being here, both in the auditorium and all those of you who are following us on the ICAO TV, because we are being streamed. The COVID crisis is not 100% overcome, as we can see in the news every day, but we are at a stage where we can have events that are both on-site and virtual, so hybrid events. This is the first hybrid event that ICAO is celebrating outside of Montreal. So, bearing in mind and adhering to all the health guidelines and with the capacity available here, well, we've had to close the registration earlier. Well, in some countries, we know that COVID is on the up and there are new variants appearing. That has made it impossible for some people to be here on site, but at least online they can also follow or participate. So we're delighted to be here in the capital of the Canary Islands, those fortunate islands that are mentioned back in Greek mythology 2,000 years ago. Those fortunate islands beyond the Mediterranean, where everything would be easy, everything would flow, everything would be possible. Nature would flower almost spontaneously. These islands are, in their daily life, their economy and their development, so closely linked to tourism. So air transport is an absolutely strategic element of their present and their future. We should also bear in mind those who are being affected by the volcanic eruption on La Palma, one of the Canary Islands. Nature is beautiful, but it can be brutal. This makes us think about how small and how fragile the human presence on planet Earth actually is. We know very well that here in the Canary Islands, you are very aware of the subjects that we're going to talk about here, and we really hope that we're not going to let you down. We bear particularly in mind the 1977 accident in the northern airport of Tenerife, and of course the Spanair accident of 2008 that was flying into Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, where 154 people lost their lives and there were 18 survivors, some of whom are with us today. These two accidents were brutal blows, very difficult to overcome, and whose memory is with us. I'd just like to point to the tireless commitment of the Air Crash Victims and Families Federation, that international federation. Their president, Pilar Vera, is It presides the current association of the accidents of the Spanair accident, following in the wake of the pioneer that was Hans Ephraimson in the States, and with the support of other associations. These have been the first steps, the most difficult, which is to make visible the assistance and support to victims and families. And lastly, we hope that this encounter will help not only to contribute to guarantee safety and security in aviation, but also particularly as a tribute, a homage to all those who have suffered in some ways the consequences of an aviation accident, the victims, the survivors and their families and loved ones. We hope that our debates, conclusions and recommendations will lead us to a point where, if an accident happens, all the negative consequences can be mitigated and brought down to a minimum. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm delighted to hand the floor over to María José Arrayo, the Spanish Secretary General for Transport and Mobility.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, colleagues, members of the presidential table, President of the Canary Islands, Presidents of the Gran Canaria Island Council, Mayor of the city, so delegates. Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. So on behalf of the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda, I'm very honored to participate in the opening session of this symposium on the assistance to aircraft victims and their families, organized by the ICAO, and also this is the first symposium that has been carried out outside of the territory of the ICAO. I'm really honored that this organization accepted to hold this event here in Spain, especially in Gran Canaria. So, of course, I would like to thank the magnificent collaboration that we have with the organization of the ICAO for the organization of this symposium, and I also want to expressly thank the work carried out by the government of the Canary Islands and also by the Fundación Aéreos together with this ministry. Of course, I cannot forget due to the valuable contributions of the associations of victims, International Association of Victims of Aircraft and their victims. They have made the technical program to be of very high quality, and we hope that they mark a milestone in the history of the ICAO. Thanks to this intense work and hard work, we have been able to make a reality that this symposium can be the first symposium, as Victor Aguado said before. This is a hybrid symposium, and also because it's being held in the Canary Islands, in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, when the Spanish hospitality is more present than ever. So also I would like to welcome all the individuals, all the persons that are following this symposium online. So we are very aware of the current situation, of the current limitations to travel. And also we are aware of the difficulties to hold and to arrange this sort of events. I'm sure and I'm fully convinced that the work of all the engineers and the technicians in this auditorium, I am sure that you will be able to follow these activities of these symposiums with no difficulties. Of course, all the topics that are going to be discussed over the next days are very important, are extremely important for the civil aviation internationally. We have assistance to the victims of air crashes and their families, and the government has focused, the government of Spain has focused on the improvement of the procedures and the training about this assistance. It is essential to have the appropriate regulation with clear procedures between all the members, all the stakeholders involved. In the case of an air crash, we need to have experience in the human treatment, and also we have to implement all these procedures through drills. So In the case that it is necessary, we hope that this is never necessary, but we cannot rule out this. So if this happens, we have to provide the best assistance to the individuals and their families, to the victims and the family. Our experts through the General Directorate General of the Civil Aviation in the Ministry of Transport, they are working so that more and more states can implement and can give the importance that is required to this topic, because civil aviation knows no frontiers, and a tragedy can hit a passenger of any nationality and their relatives in any country of the world. So that's why Spain highly values the leadership carried out by the ICAO, and the huge steps they have taken forward in this field. Spain, as one of the founding states of the ICAO, will continue to be very active with our experience, with our capabilities, and we will be collaborating with anything that may be possible for the implementation of the policies and of regulations and the provisions in all the countries in the world. So these provisions will be never appropriate and will be useless if they do not have the experiences of the victims, of the associations of victims and of their families. So their contribution is essential, is absolutely essential to get a system that can be capable of providing a comprehensive, appropriate assistance. So all the points of view that will be provided in this symposium will lay the foundations for the in order to understand the needs and to provide a better assistance to the victims and to the relatives and the families. I would like to thank again the ICAO, the Government of the Canary Islands, all the authorities, all the technical officers from the ministry that have been working very hard for the organization of this symposium, and also from Fundación en Aire, and I hope this is very interesting to you all. So thank you very much, General Secretary of Transport. Now I would like to listen to the words, to the address of the President of the Council, Salvatore Sacchitano. He wanted to be here, but he had another commitment. I think he's in Rwanda, and he has sent a message, and I would like to listen to this message in the screen. So, Mr. Sacchitano, could you please play the video? Thanks.
It's an honor for me to address this first ever ICAO symposium on assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families. And I very much regret not being able to be with you in person as a result of an unforeseen regional commitment. Although I could not be there, ICAO is very well represented by its Secretary General, Mr. Juan Carlos Salazar, whose physical presence with you today is a testimony to the level of commitment that ICAO has made to this important objective. As we begin this symposium today, I wish to extend ICAO's sincere sympathy to all those who have suffered distress and loss as a result of an aircraft accident. As an organization whose top priority is safety, one fatal aircraft accident is one too many. Respect for victims of civil aviation accidents and the mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of their families is of paramount importance to ICAO. Consequently, ICAO works diligently to ensure that these needs are considered and accommodated by its member states. As part of its work in the area of assistance to aviation accidents victims' families, I wish to recall that the ICAO Council had a meeting with Aircraft Victims Families Federation International, or ACVFI, in May 2021. This objective was to raise awareness of ICAO's governing body, the ICAO's current activities on assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families, and to review areas where enhanced support was needed. I do believe that it was a very helpful meeting that contributed to let ICAO to focus on requests and needs of families of victims. More in general, I wish to remind that safety is always paramount amongst ICAO's priorities. And its outcomes require monumental team effort involving not only the global standards and the national regulators, but also crew, airline, and airport safety teams, air traffic controllers and their navigation specialists, aircraft designers and manufacturers, and the maintenance and other service providers who keep aircraft and infrastructure fully operational. ICAO member states continue working towards ambitious global safety targets, in tandem with the strengthening of their regulatory capacities, while pursuing a range of programs and the targets relevant to the current core areas of global aviation safety planning, oversight, and risk mitigation. While global efforts continue to reinforce aviation's reputation as the safest form of travel, we are here today in recognition of the fact that despite all of ICAO's standards and the millions of people dedicated to keeping flying safe and secure on a daily basis, no system is perfect. And we must also recognize that in light of the very nature of modern transport, unforeseen and serious accidents in our sector can result in fatalities. While countries and ICAO are not directly engaged in the day-to-day operations from which accidents derive, we can and do recognize the solemn responsibility to ensure that timely and comprehensive information, care, and the resources are provided to accident victims and their loved ones. Apart from the work already undertaken to address the needs of aircraft accident victims and their families with a specific policy and a new ICAO manual, ICAO is also currently developing a training course in this area. 12 countries develop or refine appropriate family assistance legislation, regulations, policy, and plans. This issue is also recently addressed by the ICAO Facilitation Panel. It has in fact recommended that associated priorities be enshrined not only in a policy, but indeed in a full ICAO standard. This would place a more formal compliance obligation on states to develop effective victim support frameworks. In a parallel development, the ministers participating in the ICAO's recently concluded high-level conference on COVID-19 have addressed further calls to states and airlines to take action on this issue as a matter of priority. Lastly, I wish to inform you that ICAO Council has very recently approved the establishment of the 20th February as a new International Day for commemoration of lives which have been lost due to air accidents, and for the continuing promotion of the need to establish and refine the support victims' families expect and deserve. It's my hope that the discussion and the presentations here over the coming days will provide you with excellent opportunities to take account of the current progress being achieved in enhancing assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families, and to consider further activities and actions which could benefit the future progress. In concluding, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the Air Crash Victims Families Federation International and the ICAO's Council representative from Spain, Mr. Victor Aguado, for an invaluable dedication and contribution to ensuring that this priority received the due international attention. I would also express my great appreciation and thanks to the government of Spain and the regional government of Gran Canaria for hosting this event. I very much look forward to your outcomes and conclusions and wish you a very engaging and productive symposium. Thank you very much for your attention.
Le damos las gracias.
Thank you very much, even though it's in a virtual form, to the Council. And I now hand over the word to Augusto Hidalgo Macario, who's the mayor of the city of Las Palmas.
Thank you very much, President of the Government of the Canary Islands, President of the Island Council, Secretary General of Transport and Mobility, Secretary General of the ICAO, delegates, members in this symposium. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I would like to welcome you to this city where we are holding this first symposium of assistance to aircraft victims and their families. Firstly, I would like to remind you some data that I have listened to in May by the IATA, that saying that the airline will recover by 2023 all the passengers that they have lost during this economic crisis due to the COVID pandemic. So we are talking about 4.5 billion millions of passengers, with the intention of multiplying, of increasing to 1 billion of further passengers by the end of this decade, and they will have to discount at 7% of what they wanted to increase of their due to as a result of the COVID pandemic. So the growth in passengers of air transport worldwide, of course, will continue to increase exponentially or proportionally over the next years, even though this crisis, and this will lead us to be clear. We have to be clear that we have to be even more demanding if possible, because the impact that this will have on the human activity in the planet will be tremendous, especially in the territories where we are, in the Canary Islands where we are, that almost exclusively depends on the passenger of the air transport for the transport of passengers. We were connected to the planet through the shipping, to the maritime transport, and we continue to do this with America and Europe. But our economy lives on 16 or 18 million tourists. So the safety and the security is a significant element, is a paramount element. And we have three factors in this equation. So the airlines providing this security and these safeties, of course, the states and the international organizations for this to be carried out. And the third cornerstone will be the civil society through the social organizations, and in this case, through these victims organization that had been essential and will continue to be essential in all as it happens in all the democratic societies, so that this security can be extended to the system in order to avoid dramatic situations that Mr. Aguado mentioned in the history of the Canary Islands. So we still remember, of course, the accident from the 1970s in Los Rodeos in Tenerife that is still remember. This is a part of the aviation manuals, and of course, due to the closest period in time that we had in JK 5022, that it didn't happen here, but it was coming to Gran Canaria, and we suffered and we saw the personal consequences of the victims, many people from these islands, from this city. This was also a driving factor, so that this organization can, so they have been the driving factor to hold this type of events. And this will be clarifying. So I would like to thank you for being here. I hope that you enjoy your time here in this city with our climate and with the infrastructure, and we hope that you can get very fruitful conclusions from this symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Mayor. I'd like to now invite the President of the Gran Canaria Island Council, Antonio Morales Mendez, to address the floor. Thank you very much. Good morning, President of the Canary Islands government and the authorities from the ICAO. the Air Crash Victims and Family International Federation Association. Welcome to you all, authorities and participants. Welcome to Gran Canaria. It's an honor for us as the Island Council to be able to host an act that is just so important for thousands and thousands of people. As people have said, I'd like to concentrate on the fact that here in Gran Canaria, unfortunately, we are very well aware of the personal and social damage that air accidents cause. And, you know, we have vivid memories of that awful 20th of August 2008 with 154 deaths and 18 injured survivors. We have borne witness to the victims and the victims' families' fight for justice and for recognition and the terrible difficulties that they've had along the way. We hope that this symposium will serve so that circumstances like this are not repeated and that air crash accident victims and their families can have the support and assistance that they need. And we know that the rule of law is not just a generic part of what happens in law courts exactly, but it should also address the freedom and the rights so that each and every person and body all the way up the tree should be subject to control so that we can all feel safe and secure as the world changes around us. And civil aviation, I'm sure, needs to give a firm and safe, secure response so that we can travel with the necessary security. And should one of these terrible accidents happen, the response will be agile and will really be able to provide justice. Thank you very much to Pilar and to the other members of the association for all the work that you do. Thank you so much to everybody for being here and for your commitment. I really hope that this symposium will be productive and that you'll be able to enjoy your stay in Gran Canaria. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President of the Council of Gran Canaria. Now I would like to give the floor to the President of the Government of the Canary Islands, Mr. Ángel Víctor Torres. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mayor, President of Cabildo, IKO of victims, so members, and so all the authorities. First of all, I would like to thank you for this first symposium that is held in Spain by the ICAO for holding this event in Spain and in Gran Canaria. As both the mayor and the president of the Island Council on the 20th of August 2008, the flight JK5022, as you know, it was coming to Gran Canaria and it ended up with 153 deaths plus other people who were injured, and 80 of those passengers were from the Canary Islands. 13 years later, we still have the pain that we suffer with this tragedy, and we still have here their relatives, their families, and this forum for the analysis and for proposals should also be useful in order to improve the air safety and the attention to the victims and to their families. We have 3 days with a meeting of 100 of experts that will analyze many topics, including the collateral effects caused by an air crash. Because we have the obligation to learn from the experience, we also we have the obligation to have justice, and we have to establish mechanisms to provide assistance and also to the victims, and also we have to establish a better connectivity security. Security and safety will be something that will be discussed here, but not only the security and safety, but also the protection of the rights of the victims, the good practices by the airlines and also by the insurance companies. We need to have independent, thorough investigations, and the relatives must be provided with precise, accurate information, psychological attendance and care. And also because we are in traumatic circumstances. After the 20th of August 2008, we were afraid of traveling, but we have no other option. If we live in the islands, we need to use planes, and we have to address that fear. Also, because we depend economically, financially on air connectivity. That's why because we know that this symposium will be fruitful and will get significant results for the security and for the rights of the air passengers. So the Canary Islands will be together with those societies that want to take a step forward in air security and in air safety. This because we have to be in with the same goal. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to invite now the Director General of Civil Aviation, Raúl.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Victor. Dear authorities, and dear friends and colleagues, it's a privilege for me to be here with you today at this opening of this symposium in such a special place. I'd like to take this opportunity to present the work carried out by Spain, our experience, and the steps that we've taken to build our current system of assistance to victims and their families. Before we begin, I'd like to say that the Directorate General of Civil Aviation is the body in charge of directing aviation policy and designing its strategy in Spain. For years, assistance to victims has been one of the fundamental parts of aviation policy. So I'd just like to explain how everything started in 2008. As we've heard, the Spanair flight JK5022 crashed. This was the most severe accident in Spain in the last 40 years, and it really marked a turning point. We learnt valuable lessons from it, such as the importance of having an adequate framework for the protection of victims and their families, a framework that humanized how they're treated and put them in the place they deserve. Ever since then, work has been carried out on this issue. Since 2013, Spain has had basic legislation defining the scope of the assistance to be provided, the beneficiaries, the coordination among the different actors involved, the procedures and the organizational structure. The Office for the Assistance to Aircraft Accident Victims was also created and attached to the Ministry of Transport's Emergency and Crisis Management Unit. The legislation I refer to is based on ICAO's documents 9973 and 9998, which establish the minimum content that each administration's emergency plans must have nationwide. It also requires airlines and airports to have specific assistance to victims plans, which must also be approved and audited by AESA, which is the Spanish Aviation Supervisory Authority. Finally, this legislation requires all these procedures to be implemented through practice drills in which service providers, the Aviation Supervisory Authority, and the Victims Assistance Office all participate. The intense work carried out over these years has enabled us to have an extensive, structured, and coherent regulatory framework, for which we've also been able to count on the collaboration and experience of victims' associations. Internationally, we have pursued improvements. In 2012, thanks to the intense work undertaken in the ICAO Council, Spain managed to revise the ICAO Circular number 283, thanks to Victor Aguado, which was the only guidance material in this regard that existed at that time. This led to the development of the ICAO policy and manual on assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families, which I'm sure you're aware of. In addition, at the 38th session of the ICAO Assembly in 2013, Spain, with other states, proposed the inclusion of a new recommended practice for all countries to establish laws, regulations, and/or policies for assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families. As a result, the Council, 2 years later, adopted Amendment 25 to Annex 9, which incorporated recommended practice 8.46 with the exact wording that Spain had put forward or proposed to the Assembly. And finally, Spain continues to advocate for these provisions to be complemented with inspections through ICAO audit programs. In fact, we have the honor of being the first state to have an assistant system that has been audited by ICAO with a satisfactory result. The person responsible, Dennis Linden, who was responsible for this, and will be talking to you about this later on. So in essence, we're committed to encouraging other states to establishing the same types of systems in line with the ICAO provisions, to report their progress in a timely manner through the electronic filing of differences system, and to voluntarily request audits to verify their progress. To this end, Spain will continue to participate in ICAO expert groups, supporting all those initiatives that improve assistance, as we did in the last facilitation panel, whose valuable recommendations are for us the result of ongoing work carried out over the last few years. Despite everything that I've already mentioned, we're totally engaged in a process of continuous improvement. That's the reason that we're here today. This symposium must be able to provide answers, to show best practices, and to open new channels for the improvement of the assistance provided. I'm absolutely convinced that the work and the conclusions that we'll talk about here during the symposium will set the foundations for future work in ICAO, particularly bearing in mind the next assembly to be held in 2022. This is the commitment of the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, and my personal commitment as well, always to have doors open in order to address any concerns that victims and their families may bring to us. Thank you very much for your attention, and we hope that you enjoy this symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General. And now I would like to give the floor to the Secretary General of the ICAO, Juan Carlos Salazar. So he's been the Secretary General for a few months, so I'd say that he's in his honeymoons in this organization. Thank you very much, Victor, and I hope the honeymoon can last. So, Secretary General, President, Major, Director General, and also Rafael, who will share his experience. So, good morning. Good evening for those who are following this, or good night those who are watching this on television. If you don't mind, I will be speaking in English.
It's a great honor to be able to be here with you in person today and to have the opportunity to briefly reflect around and add around the aspects that were mentioned by the Council President in terms of ICAO and its role in helping states set out effective victim assistance policies and programs. I will also take this moment to reiterate ICAO's appreciation for the government of Spain and the regional government of Canary Islands for hosting this symposium. In 1998, during the 32nd session of the ICAO Assembly, the subject of assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families was considered for the first time. The Assembly adopted Resolution 32-7 at that time, which underscored that the state of occurrence should address the most critical needs of persons affected by a civil aviation accident, that the policy of ICAO should be to ensure that mental, physical, and spiritual well-being of victims involved in civil aviation accidents and their families are considered and accommodated by ICAO and its contracting states, and that states should work to achieve alignment in their approaches to assisting victims of civil aviation accidents and their families. During the same session, the Assembly also called on states to reaffirm their related commitments to support victims of civil aviation accidents and their family members. It urged them to collaboratively and promptly develop and implement regulations and programs to provide such support. And lastly, it urged the ICAO Council to develop materials to assist states in recognizing the priorities concerned. This subject was further addressed in a side meeting during the 13th Air Navigation Conference and again in 2019 during the 40th session of the ICAO Assembly, when more specific revisions were requested to Annex 9 of the Chicago Convention. Those were just mentioned by the Director of Civil Aviation of Spain. Throughout the past several years, ICAO has taken numerous initiatives to ensure that family assistance matters are adequately addressed. Annex 13 to the Convention, which pertains specifically to international aircraft accident and incident investigation, had its first provision associated with family assistance added in 1976, when the countries of origin for accident victims became officially entitled to participate in the investigation. In 2005, Annex 9 provisions became standard, requiring states to facilitate the timely and temporary entry of accident victim family members into their territory. In 2013, the ICAO Council approved 2 new publications in this area: ICAO Policy on Assistance to Aircraft Accident Victims and Their Families, and the ICAO Manual on Assistance to Aircraft Accident Victims and Their Families. The manual, in particular, calls for actions on part of states, on relevant non-government organizations, to reaffirm their commitment to ensure that adequate and sufficient assistance is provided to accident victims and their families. It also encouraged states to incorporate ICAO policies when developing and implementing their legislation, regulations, policies, and procedures related to family assistance. The manual further addresses the development of family assistance plans by aircraft and airport operators, highlighting relevant areas for attention and action. As we speak now, Annex 9 is also in the process of being amended to incorporate 2 proposals made by the Air Crash Victims Family Federation International. Under the first proposal, ICAO plans to elevate an existing recommended practice to a standard, which will make it an obligation for states to establish legislation, regulations, and/or policies in support of assistance to aircraft accident victims and their families. The second proposal is to adopt a new recommended practices requiring aircraft and airport operators to do the same. The ICAO Air Transport Committee has approved these two proposals, which have been sent to member states and relevant international organizations for comments before final adoption by the Council. In concluding, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Air Crash Victim Families Federation International for their contributions to assuring that this important issue is being addressed at the international level. Señora Pilar y a todos los miembros de esta federación. The ICAO Secretariat, through the delivery of capacity building and development of guidance materials, is continuing to closely support these efforts and outcomes. I would also like to reaffirm to you that ICAO is attuned to the needs of families and victims of aircraft accidents and stands ready to continue working with the states, the aviation community, and family associations towards the progress on this subject of utmost importance. Aviation safety is an incredible team effort, as others have mentioned, but this same cooperation must also be directed towards ensuring that the rights of accident victims and their families are assured in the aftermath of a tragic event. I look forward to these discussions and to moving this issue forward on the basis of the outcomes of our meetings and presentations. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor secretario general.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. And finally, we're going to hand over to Rafael Vidal Rodriguez, who was born in 68 in Madrid. He's an electronics engineer. He's a survivor of the Spanair flight that crashed in August 2008 en route to Las Palmas de Gran Canaria. 154 people died and 18 survivors were left, one of whom is Rafael. He has recovered. But he's not only recovered, he has reinvented himself. He's reborn. But not just that, he's come back to improve the quality of life of other people, as we will hear from him. So we would like to hear from him. Thank you, Rafael. So, good morning, everybody. As you've just heard, my name is Rafael Vidal. I'm a victim and a survivor of the JK 5022 flight. And I'm here with exactly the same purpose as of all of you, which is to improve the assistance to victims and their families and to try to suggest some proposals. And I hope that some of my opinions and the reflections that I've included in my presentation can help you to make decisions in this symposium. Firstly, the most important thing here would be for you to understand. You can see that I'm here, I'm healthy, and I've walked in. But after an accident of this type, in my case, for example, this has taken 10 years of surgical operations. And, you know, I really want you to understand that there's a before and an after here. On the right-hand side here, you can see there's a kind of professional background, which gets completely cut off after these 10 years of recovery period. There's a social loss. I lose my livelihood, and my professional trajectory is just completely shattered. It's really important that you understand that to be able to really get a grip on the context. And this is, from my point of view, the immediate needs for a victim, the most important ones after an air crash. I haven't put them at different levels or in a hierarchy, because it is equally important to be able to make that psychological recuperation and the physical recuperation, it's also vitally important to understand why this accident actually happened. And because they're really interconnected, understanding what has happened really helps a victim on the psychological side. So these 5 needs are the most important and the basic ones. So as I've read round, we've got to the psychological and physical recovery, the big why. Why did it happen? We need financial compensation, obviously. And then the meaning, but I'll go into that in a bit. But, what's the purpose of the rest of your life, after the crash? So how are you going to be able to carry on, and how are you going to be able to move forward in your life? And I think that it's also really important to look at how the media treat the information, both in terms of the members of the family of the victims and the direct victims themselves. So, if we look at the first need here, what I call, the big why, I think it's absolutely vital. You're not going to be able to, as it were, get well psychologically if you don't understand the why. I think it would be really interesting if you could talk about this and try and find solutions to try to avoid the problems that I lived through. Because I think that these 2 big barriers get in the way of victims being able to understand this why. Because I think that if there's a lack of independence and autonomy of some of the authorities in charge of the investigations, you're not going to be able to get to a clear why. And one of the other big obstacles or barriers that I saw in my experience is that manufacturers don't provide the detailed specifications or information required. In my case, the manufacturer absolutely refused to give us any of the technical details. And that meant that, the whole process, the investigation was closed, but with massive gaps. Another need here that I think that you're going to talk about as well, because it's one of the blocks that you're going to look at, and that's the need to receive a financial compensation to be able to surmount the problems that come up not only the day after or in the immediate future, but actually in the mid to long term. This is something that lasts for the whole of your life if it's happened to you. And obviously there are different stages there. And so, if we can't bring the victims that have died back to life, but they need to have some kind of compensation. And I think this is the major difference or the inequality between the manufacturers, the operators, the exploiters, the large insurance companies vis-a-vis the victims. There's such a massive difference in terms of the inequality. So we need to find balances and mechanisms to be able to redress this. And I think it's also really important that you look at the economic amounts that are received by the victims, and they need to be aligned with the insurance policies that are taken out. It shouldn't be just a ridiculously tiny sum by comparison to the premiums that are paid. Another thing here I think that's very important is that the financial resources need to arrive when they're needed, not years and years later, because years and years later is no good to anybody. And my point of view, or from my personal experience, the solution or part of the solution to these immediate problems is what I'm sharing with you now. That financial compensation that never arrived on time saved my leg, because they were going to amputate my leg in the National Health Service here in Spain. And I was able to save it by having a private operation, and I didn't have any money. And I thought about selling my house in order to be able to save my leg. Why? Well, because the financial compensation didn't arrive in time. Yep, some of it is now coming through years later, but that would be far too late to save my leg. So that's why it's so important that it should come through in time. And now what happens? We know that the financial compensation that victims receive is too little and too late. Obviously, I'd like to thank Pilar Vera, who has chaired the Victims and Families Association for all those affected by the Spanair flight. It's thanks to her that I'm able to be here with my leg and pretty well recovered. But if I hadn't had the support of this association, I wouldn't have been able to get better, physically. And I wouldn't have been able to deal with the insurance companies, because they have almost limitless resources compared to the resources of a victim. It's a kind of David and Goliath situation. So another part of the victim's needs, which we've seen in the in the first slide, which is to try to find a meaning, that's a purpose in life, because human nature is such that we're always trying to find out, this has happened, maybe that's what was written and that was my destiny. And in my case, since the accident happened, I set up a company which is called Indesmed, to try to help people who had problems and needs, and trying to improve the lot of those people who need it. And just to draw to a close, I would hope that these brief notes on my experience, I would hope that they would help you to improve assistance to victims and their families. Just to run through them again, please bear in mind this abyss between the resources of the operators, the manufacturers, the government, and the victims. The lack of independence and autonomy of the authorities in charge of investigating the causes of the accident, and the proper opportune management of how the media shares sensitive information publicly and with their families. I hope this will help you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Rafael, for sharing your experience. All those conclusions are obviously issues that we're going to be looking at over the next 2.5 days. Your testimonial is unique, and we really appreciate it. Thank you to all the authorities who have been with us here in this inauguration. Thank you for dedicating your time to this cause. So we have now finished this inauguration ceremony, and we'll have a short break, and then we'll start with the first panel. Thank you.